That laptop you've been blaming for being slow, it's probably not the hardware. I want you to hold on to that thought for a second, because I know how easy it is to look at a 3 or 4-year-old machine and assume it's just done. That the processor's too old, the RAM is too thin, the storage is too slow, and the only real fix is spending money you may not want to spend. I've heard that from a lot of people. I've thought about it myself, and in most cases, it's wrong. What's actually happening to your machine is fixable, it's free, and it doesn't require you to be a tech person to do it. By the end of this, your laptop is going to feel genuinely different. Not marginally better, not slightly less annoying. Different. Let me show you why and exactly how to get there. Here's what's actually happening inside your machine, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. When you first set up a Windows laptop, it runs on relatively clean hardware with a relatively clean software environment. The operating system has its processes, a few manufacturer apps load at startup, and that's mostly it. The machine boots in under 30 seconds, apps open quickly, and everything feels snappy. Then time passes. You install things. Some of those things are useful. Some of them add background services you never asked for. Every app that decides it needs to run its startup adds to the queue of processes competing for your CPU and RAM before you've even opened a browser tab. After 2 or 3 years of normal use, a typical Windows machine can have anywhere from 20 to 40 programs attempting to launch its startup. And security research firm Avast published data from analyzing millions of machines showing that the average Windows PC runs more than 200 background processes at any given moment. Most of those are invisible to the average user. Almost none of them were consciously chosen. Then there's Windows itself. Microsoft ships Windows 11 with visual effects enabled by default, animated transitions, shadow rendering, transparency effects on menus and taskbars. On a brand new high-end machine with dedicated graphics, these are practically free. On a mid-range laptop from 3 years ago running on integrated graphics and shared RAM, they eat real resources. Nothing dramatic. Just a constant low-level tax on your system that compounds every time you switch windows, open a menu, or scroll a page. It's the kind of thing you never notice as a single cause, but contributes meaningfully to the sluggish feeling that builds over time. Storage is the third leg of this. Not just how full your drive is, though that matters, but how Windows manages what's on it. Windows Prefetch and Superfetch are features designed to anticipate what you'll open and preload it into memory. On fast SSDs, these features can actually slow things down because the SSD doesn't need the assist, and the service just consumes resources trying to predict your behavior. On older hard drives, fragmentation over time means the mechanical redhead is physically traveling longer paths to retrieve files. Neither of these is catastrophic on its own. Together, across a machine that hasn't been maintained in 2 years, they add up to the machine you're probably sitting in front of right now. The one that takes a minute and a half to finish booting, lags when switching between apps, and sounds like it's thinking hard about simple tasks. Security researcher and Windows performance analyst Rudy Ooms, who runs the independent site Call4Cloud and has spent years documenting Windows behavior at the system level, has written extensively about how default Windows configurations prioritize feature richness over performance, particularly on machines below the hardware threshold where those features run smoothly. His analysis lines up with independent testing by Nearsoft, whose system utilities have been used by IT professionals for over 2 decades to audit exactly what's running under the hood. Both sources point to the same root cause. Windows accumulates overhead by design, and the tools to reduce that overhead are built in and free. They're just not surfaced in any obvious way. Think about what this means practically. You didn't break your laptop, you didn't fill it with malware, you just used it normally for a few years, while Windows quietly added weight without asking. That's actually good news, because weight can be removed. Let's get into the actual fix. And I'm going to give you 5 layers here because one setting alone won't cut it. Each layer addresses a different source of the slowdown. Some of these will take 30 seconds, some will take 5 minutes. The whole thing together takes under half an hour, and you'll feel the difference before you're done. Layer 1 is startup programs, and this is where the biggest gains usually live. Press the Windows key, type Task Manager, and open it. Click the Startup tab at the top. What you'll see is every program that launches when your computer boots, along with a column, on the right showing its impact, low, medium, or high. Go through this list carefully. Anything rated high or medium that you don't genuinely need running at startup, a gaming launcher you open once a week, a cloud backup app for a service you barely use, a manufacturer utility from when you first bought the machine. Right-click it and hit Disable. You are not uninstalling these programs. They'll still work when you open them manually. You're just telling Windows to stop loading them before you've even logged in. On a machine that's accumulated startup items over a few years, this step alone can cut your boot time in half. Do this thoughtfully. Don't disable antivirus software or anything you actively rely on starting automatically. But be honest with yourself about what the rest of the list actually earns its place. Layer 2 is Windows Visual Effects. Right-click the Start button, select System, then on the right side, click Advanced System Settings. Under the Performance section, hit Settings. You'll see a window with a long list of visual effect checkboxes and 3 radio button options at the top. Select Adjust for best performance. This disables all the animations and transparency effects at once. Then, if you want to put a few back, because the interface feels too stripped down, recheck Show Thumbnails instead of icons and smooth edges of screen fonts. Those two keep things functional and readable without adding significant overhead. Everything else can stay off. The difference on an older machine is immediate and noticeable. Menus snap open, windows move without lag. The whole interface feels more direct. It's not glamorous, but it's one of the most effective things on this list. Layer 3 is your power plan, and this one surprises people. CPL, hit Enter. You'll see your power plan options. Most laptops default to a balanced plan, which dynamically scales processor speed to conserve battery. That's a reasonable trade-off when you're running on battery. When you're plugged in, it's just a limiter on performance. Select High Performance, or if you're on Windows 11, look for Ultimate Performance in the Additional. Plan section, you may need to click Show Additional Plans to see it. This tells your processor to stop throttling itself and run at full capacity. On an older machine where the CPU already has a ceiling, removing the artificial floor underneath it makes a real difference for sustained tasks, like having multiple browser tabs open while running a video call. If you're primarily on battery, keep balance selected and only switch this when you're plugged in. That's the honest trade-off. Layer 4 is Storage Sense and Disk Cleanup. Open Settings, System, Storage. Toggle on Storage Sense if it isn't already, and click the arrow to configure it. Set it to run automatically every month. Clean up your Downloads folder on a schedule if that matches how you work, and clear previous Windows installation files if any exist. Those can consume several gigabytes. Then scroll down and click Temporary Files. Windows will scan and show you what's taking up space in your temp folders, recycle bin, thumbnails cache, and delivery optimization files. Review the list and delete what's safe. Temporary. Files and delivery optimization files are safe for everyone. How much space you recover varies, but it's not uncommon to reclaim 10 to 15 gigabytes on a machine that hasn't been cleaned in a year. More importantly, clearing this overhead reduces the indexing load Windows is managing in the background. Layer 5 is Background Apps. Settings, Apps, Installed Apps. For any app you don't use regularly, click the 3 dots next to it and check whether it has background activity permissions. Then go to Settings, Privacy and Security, Background Apps, and audit what's allowed to run when you're not actively using it. Email apps, news widgets, weather services, all of these poll for updates in the background, consuming CPU and network resources on a schedule. For anything you open intentionally when you need it, revoke the background permission. You're not breaking the app, you're just telling it to wait until you ask for it instead of running on its own schedule. These 5 layers, startup items, visual effects, power plan, storage cleanup, background apps, are the core of what I'm calling the $0 reset stack. They're all built into Windows. They require no downloads, no third-party tools, no technical expertise beyond following a menu. Done together, they address the root causes of accumulated slowdown rather than treating symptoms. There is no magic app that does all of this for you with one click. And honestly, you should be skeptical of anything that promises that, because the reputable ones cost money and the free ones often bundle their own background services that add new weight while removing the old. One important note, if your machine has fewer than 8 gigabytes of RAM and is running Windows 11 with multiple browsers open, no amount of optimization will fully overcome that hardware constraint. These steps will help, but at some point, RAM is RAM. Similarly, if your storage drive is a traditional spinning hard drive rather than an SSD, every one of these optimizations still helps. But the single biggest upgrade you could make to a machine in that situation is a hardware one. A 250 gigabyte SSD runs under $50 and will transform performance more dramatically than any software fix. That's a hardware recommendation, not a $0 one, but it's worth knowing where the real ceiling is. If your machine already has an SSD, the software stack I've walked through is where your gains live. There's a reason these settings don't come configured this way out of the box, and it's worth understanding before you close this video. Microsoft ships Windows with visual effects, startup services, background app permissions, and balanced power plans enabled because those settings make the operating system look good in store demos and marketing screenshots and during the first hour of a new laptop setup. A machine running every animation, syncing every app, and displaying full transparency effects looks polished when someone opens it in a store. The experience of using that machine 6 months later, after normal software accumulation, under those same default settings, that's a different conversation. There's also a commercial dimension. Many of the apps that wedge themselves into your startup list and your background processes are there because they were paid placements from the manufacturer or pre-installed trial software designed to drive subscriptions. The slowdown that results from their presence creates a market for the same manufacturers to sell you a newer laptop. This isn't a conspiracy. It's just the economics of how consumer hardware gets subsidized. Understanding it is useful because it reframes what normal Windows performance actually means. The out-of-box experience isn't a baseline, it's a compromised state. The optimized state is what your hardware is actually capable of when you clear the overhead. Jason Evangelho, a former Forbes technology writer who has spent years documenting Windows versus Linux performance comparisons on identical hardware, has noted repeatedly that mid-range Windows machines running optimized configurations consistently outperform their factory default selves by margins most users would describe as feeling like a hardware upgrade. The hardware didn't change, the settings did. That's a meaningful data point. Here's the shift that separates people who fix their PC once from people who never have to fix it again. The problem with most performance guides, and I include a lot of what exists online in this, is that they treat optimization as an event. You do the thing, you feel the improvement, and 6 months later you're back in the same place wondering what happened. That's because the forces creating the slowdown don't stop. New software installs new startup items. Windows updates occasionally re-enable settings. Apps request background permissions and get them by default. The machine drifts back toward bloat the same way a clean desk drifts toward clutter, not through any single dramatic event, just through accumulated small decisions that nobody consciously made. The maintenance mindset is simple. Once every 3 months, open Task Manager and review the Startup tab. Take 5 minutes with Storage Sense. Check your background app permissions after any major software install. None of this is a time commitment. It's closer to brushing your teeth. Brief, regular, and far less painful than the alternative. You started this video with a laptop that felt like it was aging out of usefulness. What you actually had was a capable machine running under a load of accumulated default settings it never needed. That distinction matters, not just for this laptop, but for the next one, because the same forces will apply there too. But the difference now is that you know what to look for and where to find it. You don't need to buy a new machine to have a fast machine. You need about 30 minutes and the willingness to look inside the menus Windows would rather you didn't spend too much time in. That's it. That's the whole secret. Go do the walkthrough today while it's fresh. Start with the Startup tab in Task Manager. That's where you'll feel the most immediate difference. And if this gave you something useful, subscribe. I cover these fixes the moment they're worth knowing about. Drop a comment and tell me how much you recovered in boot time. I'm genuinely curious what people find in that startup list. I'll see you in the next one.